Hey everybody, Jason Blaha here. Today I'd like to talk to you about bicep training and the biggest mistakes that I see people do on a day-to-day basis in gyms regarding bicep training. And hold on, let me give you guys a bicep shot, which is appropriate enough considering the topic of the video. Okay, bicep training. Um, Again, how do I say how do I say this nicely? Biceps are everyone's favorite muscle. Everyone wants bigger arms. Everyone wants bigger biceps. And it's probably one of the most simplistic muscles in the body to develop and in terms of its function. But people just they cannot seem to grasp how to train a bicep. And I mean, and it's kind of like my shop teacher told us one day when I was in high school. He told us, "You guys could fuck up a wet dream." And that seems to be the case, with people in their bicep training. And I'm just going to show you the basic functions of the bicep and what the bicep does. Obviously, the first function that it does is that it bends the elbow and it draws the wrist and forearm closer to the shoulder. Pretty straightforward. The other function that it serves, and you'll note this when I pronate and supinate my wrist, is that again, it pronates and supinates the wrist. And you'll notice my bicep moves. And if you check in the mirror, yours will do the same. And you can see that it actually moves when you twist your wrist. And again, supination is turning the palm out. Pronation is turning the wrist in. And those are the two basic functions that the bicep serves. And by working those functions, you can develop it. The the first mistake I see people make is with bicep training is to a lot of people at the gym, the average just gym goer, noob, and sometimes even the person who's been training for a year or two, they seem to think that bringing their hand all the way up past their shoulder or past their head or to their face is somehow using the bicep. And when you look at the basic function of the bicep, you can see it brings the wrist up. But if I go any higher than this, the bicep is already fully contracted. And so from this point forward, literally, as you can see, the only joint moving is my shoulder joint, and that's a function of the anterior deltoid and the trapezius. And so what they basically do, rather than, a lot of them don't want to go do heavy compound movements for their biceps, which they should be doing. I mean, again, if you're not doing either very, very heavy barbell rows, T-bar rows, weighted chin-ups, something like that, I mean, you're still not going to get the type of bicep development you really want just from isolation movements. But they want to focus on isolation movements, but then they want to turn them into compound movements. So again, if you want to do a compound for your bicep, do some weighted chin-ups. Hang a couple of 45-pound plates off of the chain around your waist and do fucking chin-ups. Don't bring the dumbbell or the bar all the way up here. As you can see, what a lot of them do is they come up here. Again, the wrist is going to be bent over. I mean, there's just no load on the bicep at that point. There's no weight being taken by the bicep, and the entire load is actually taken by the deltoid at this point. And I even see guys bringing it all the way up to here. I mean, and it's just asinine. The other problem, and again, these two tend to go hand in hand on all of their movements. You see people doing partial reps. This is to them a bicep curl, and it's even worse because a lot of times this is a bicep curl to them. And again, they do maybe half of the rep, half of the range of motion on the actual curl, and then bring it up high so that there's no load on the bicep, and they never even work the bottom half of the movement. So again, you just when someone's curling in that manner, there is literally almost no bicep actual stimulation going on. And I see guys doing this. I mean, at my current gym, I've watched guys come in and do this, every one of their arm days for 4, 5, 6 months straight. And none of them, they're not growing. Their arms aren't getting bigger. And generally speaking, if you have 12-inch or 13-inch arms, you should be able to easily put 2 or 3 inches of meat on those arms in the first year. I mean, there's no excuse for not being able to do that. And with noob gains. And so again, I mean, their training just is clearly so horrifically bad if they're noobs and they're not gaining noticeable size on their arms on a monthly basis. Their training is just clearly off. And so again, you see that, and to people, this is a bicep curl. you know, they're just doing an uppercut. They're working literally almost nothing but their delta and their trapezius with very, very little bicep involvement other than as a static movement. Um, and so again, I would suggest to you that again, a proper bicep curl, you go all the way down, you come up to here. You can bring it up a little more, but not very far. You know, this is a bicep curl. All the way down. You know, you don't really need to come higher than about your nipple, or at the very most, you know, the top of your delt. And there's no reason to bring it higher than that unless you're trying to turn it into a power movement with a rest between reps. But, you know, again, there's better power movements that will work the biceps. Do some explosive rows. Again, do some weighted chin-ups, you know, or weighted pull-ups, and that will give you a nice heavy explosive compound for the bicep. There's no need to really try to do that with an isolation movement. And I mean, and you see the same thing with the range of motion on, you know, people do a preacher bench. And actually the beauty of the preacher bench is the amount of tension it puts in the bottom. And I see guys sitting there with their arm on the preacher bench doing this. Instead of coming all the way down where it really, really pulls on that lower insertion, you know, and doing this correctly, you see them just doing this, so that they can use a heavier weight, but they only do the top half of the range of the motion, which is actually the least effective for the bicep. So again, you see that. The other big mistake comes back to the other function. And while normally we could say that, you know, doing alternating curls so that you can pronate and supinate the wrist has benefits, and it absolutely does. So the point I want to get to is that the bicep does not fully contract unless your wrist is fully supinated. And so, I mean, if it's pronated, you notice it doesn't contract the same. Look, if my wrist is bent, it doesn't contract the same, and it peaks up when I completely supinate the wrist at the top. And otherwise, when it's not done like that, the more you're pronated, the more the brachialis under here takes the load off of the bicep as the primary mover. And again, there's just better ways to develop your brachialis, you know, than through your actual direct bicep work. I mean, you can just do hammer curls and other things to really develop that without letting it take the load when you're trying to develop the bicep. And so again, we really need to look at is, you know, looking at, are your wrists fully supinated or any bicep movement? Are your wrists completely supinated at the top of the movement? And if they aren't, then you aren't shortchanging yourself on bicep development. And I mean, this also should show you why easy curl bars are bad. And a lot of guys claim, well, their wrists are a problem. And I would suggest to you that if your wrists or forearms hurt at all when you're using a straight bar or a dumbbell, you know, which is going to give you the stress that you need, I would suggest to you that your grip is wrong, or you're doing a wrist curl. What you need to do if your forearms bother you is let your wrist trail behind a little bit when you curl. Rather than doing a wrist curl up, let your hand trail just a little bit behind your forearm when you curl, and find the right grip that doesn't pull on your forearms, right grip width. And I think for most people that they will actually find that forearm pain goes away when they're curling in this manner. So again, those are things you really want to look at. You want to, again, make sure that, you know, one, you're doing the full range of motion, you're working the bottom of the movement, that you're not bringing the weight up so high that you're taking the load off the bicep and letting other muscles do the work. And again, you need to make sure that at the top of all of your movements, you know, when the bicep is fully contracted, that you have the wrist completely supinated. And if you aren't doing these three things, then I mean, you're really just wasting your fucking time curling. You know, even bothering to try to isolate a muscle, which again, you can't really isolate a muscle. It's kind of a myth that you can isolate a muscle. But if you're at least trying to isolate it and you're not doing these things, you're really, really shortchanging yourself on your bicep development. And again, these are the mistakes I see people make every day, day in, day out at gyms. And again, and those are your solutions. Again, I hope this video has been informative, and I hope you learned something about bicep training. I'll give you guys another bicep shot, and I'll talk to you next time.